I'm not getting a lot more people. Because we got 27.
Mr. Carter, can you hear me?
I heard somebody.
I'm Jesse and Leo. We can't see our pictures. We can see you, but I'm not sure how this works. Well, we can hear you.
Good question. Anybody? Sure.
We just inhaled that. Mhm.
Start on there. That was going to work because you're in there on something. I can't.
Here's
Don't even-
Because I have the camera all set up.
There.
Here's Merle.
Look at this.
Yeah, it's not even the same.
Hi, John.
Hi. We're trying to figure this out.
Yeah, we can hear you. In the bottom left-hand corner, there's a mute button if you don't want us to hear you.
Oh, good idea.
Whoever's typing, can you mute?
This will be your last one.
Who's got the noisy clock?
I don't know what the delay is. If everyone would mute themselves, we would be hearing the background noise, and that will help when they get started. And why haven't they started?
Good question.
Good evening. We are having our city council meet in the chamber for the first time with our new technology, and they're having just a little bit of trouble getting it connected tonight, so please be patient. We hope to have them up in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Is this really a meeting?
Not yet. They're getting close. They're having a couple of difficulties.
ahead and start. They can't see you, but I'm working on it.
Sure.
Yeah, you don't want to wait too long, do you?
And remind them about their mute buttons, remind them to. Red button.
Part of my script.
No, he's good.
Okay, I'm gonna start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rich Mays and I'm the mayor for the city of the Dalles. I apologize for the delay, but we've had some unforeseen technical difficulties that we're still working on. And you will not be able to at least see the city council for a while. I've now called the meeting to order, and I'd ask the city clerk to call the roll. Or I can call the roll.
Linda Miller? Here. Mayor Mays?
Here.
Rod Runyon?
Here.
Scott Randall?
Here.
Tim McLaughlin? Darcy Long Curtis? Here.
Okay, next on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to call on Councilor Rod Runyon to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 4 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
Rod, I'll second it.
It's been moved by Councilor Miller and seconded by Councilor Runyon to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Now is the time specified for the public hearing on appeal APL 030-20 regarding the Planning Commission's decision to approve subdivision SUB 74-19. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the hearing procedures for tonight's quasi-judicial hearing have been amended. On June 26, 2020, the Oregon Legislature enacted House Bill 4212, which authorizes the city to hold virtual public meetings so it can continue to provide essential services and make decisions in a public and transparent manner while preventing the spread of COVID-19 and protecting public health. Consistent with House Bill 4212, the city has implemented the following procedures for tonight's hearing. Number 1, this meeting is accessible to the public via Zoom, and access instructions were provided in the agenda packet that is posted to the city's website. 2, the land use application and all related documents, including the applicable criteria, the Planning Commission's decision, and the appeal notice were posted to the city's website for public viewing as part of the council agenda packet. And 3, all written testimony that was received prior to this meeting was posted to the city's website for public viewing and also transmitted to the city council so the testimony can be considered in a timely manner. At this point, I have some introductions. We're still off camera, right?
Yes.
As I said before, you can't see us, but I am the mayor, Rich Mays. And when our camera does come on, going left to right, to my right is Councilor Linda Miller. To my immediate left is Councilor Rod Runyon. To his immediate left is Councilor Scott Randall. To his immediate left is Councilor Tim McLaughlin. And to his immediate left is Councilor Darcy Long Curtis. I'd also like to introduce at this time Chris Crean, who is the city's attorney. Chris is with Beery, Elsner, and Hammond in Portland, and I would expect that the city council and I may be requesting some advice and counsel from Mr. Crean during this meeting. At this point, I'd like to introduce members of the city staff who we expect will be participating in tonight's hearing. First of all, the city manager, Julie Kruger. Also, Director of Community Development, Steve Harris. City Planner, Josh Chandler, sorry. And also our Director of Public Works, Dave Anderson. And also the city engineer, Dale McCabe. I'd also like to, at this point, introduce the applicant. Jamie Housley, I see is here. Jamie is with the firm Jordan Ramus from Vancouver, and he is representing the applicant. Also, the appellant, the representative is Steve Marash. I see Steve is here. And Steve is with the firm of Landerholm in Vancouver. We also have 3 people that have submitted testimony regarding traffic. First is the DKS, which is the traffic consultant that has been hired by the applicant. Is someone here from DKS?
Not this evening.
Okay. Also, traffic consultant Kittleson, I believe it's Susan Wright, who's the third-party traffic consultant that was hired by the city to review the DKS report. Is somebody from Kittleson here?
No, they're not here tonight.
Okay, thank you. And finally, HLA, which is the traffic consultant for the appellant. Is someone here from HLA? Mr. Marash, would you happen to know?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute my thing. No, there's no one here from HLA tonight.
Okay, thank you. As soon as I open the public hearing, we're going to have a staff report. And after the staff report is completed, the city council will be asking questions of the staff. There'll be a Q&A. After the staff presentation is over, we will ask the applicant to make a presentation. The applicant will have up to 10 minutes to present his case, after which the city council will then ask questions and we'll get answers from them. After the applicant makes his presentation, we'll have the appellant make a presentation. Once again, he will be allowed up to 10 minutes, and after which we will be going through a question and answer session with the appellant. I would expect at this point, might be some questions that would be follow-up questions. We may be going back and forth a little bit. Anybody that passed that, what I've already described, all testimony from that point on will be limited to 5 minutes for any subsequent testimony, including remarks by the applicant and remarks by the appellant. So that 5 minute will be in effect. It's important to understand too that the applicant, because they have the burden of proof, will get the last word. No matter how many times we go back and forth, the applicant will be given the opportunity to have the last word. After that is over, we will then get into citizen comments. There are 3 categories of citizen comments. Number 1, those that have registered in advance with the city clerk. I have a list here of 8 people, actually 9 people who wish to testify that have already registered in advance. Second category would be those that have not registered in advance but would like to address the council. And the third is those that have called in on the phone, and they will also be given an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. The procedures for live testimony at tonight's hearing is as follows. Each person will be given 5 minutes to speak. I'm going to time each testimony and attempt to let those providing testimony know when 30 seconds remains. You must be recognized by me, the mayor, before testifying. Participants in tonight's hearing are currently muted and will be unmuted when called on by me, the mayor. So please make sure that you are muted, and we will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. As I indicated, those who have emailed the city clerk in advance to testify will be called on first. And after those people have testified, if you have logged into this meeting from your computer and you did not request in advance and you would like to testify, please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will call on you either by your name or whatever designation appears on your Zoom screen. City staff will assist me throughout this process. If you are calling in from your home or your cell phone, please wait until we have called on everyone who has logged in and testified from their computers. Those who joined using their phones will be asked if they wish to speak next. We ask everyone to be respectful, limit background noise, and not talk over each other. You must state your name and address before you begin speaking. Please speak slowly. As I indicated, I will open the public hearing with a staff report. The purpose of the staff report is to identify the applicable criteria of the case being considered and to provide background information about the case. I will then ask if the applicant and the appellant for their testimony, and then anyone from the public that would like to testify, which I've already reviewed. The council may ask questions of the staff and the applicant and the appellant during the hearing. I am asking city council members to wait until each presentation is complete before they ask questions of the staff. the applicant, or the appellant. During the hearing, some important standards apply. First, the City Council's decision is limited to the approval criteria that are listed in the staff report. For that reason, your testimony must address those criteria or other criteria you believe might apply and explain why you believe the criteria are or are not met. Evidence and testimony that does not relate to the approval criteria cannot be considered by the City Council. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the City Council and other parties an opportunity to respond to that issue prohibits an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Now, do any members of the City Council have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or bias that you need to disclose? I'm going to start with Councilor Long Curtis.
I don't, but I would like to indicate on the record that I grew up at the intersection of Thompson and 11th Street.
Thank you. Councilor McLaughlin.
I only have a couple of contacts that are, I received an email from Dr. Gingrich, Gary Gingrich, and I did call him back. And he told me that he had learned of ex parte requirements. No discussion, but a nice chat pursued. And nothing was discussed about the Grove development. And as I was driving past the ironworks, I noticed Laurel Quackenbush stepping out of his truck. Laurel brought up the development and I approached. No discussion took place, but I did learn of his objection to the development. I've not spoken to anyone from the developer side. I read the newspaper article recently. I believe I can make a fair and unbiased decision based on the facts surrounding this public forum.
Thank you. Councilor Scott Randall.
No discussion.
Councilor Runyon.
Well, I've lived here most of my life and know many of the people on both sides and so forth, but have worked very hard not to have discussions with anyone. I've not opened up any personal emails from anyone. And although I've been approached, I've told them right away that I'm not going to discuss it now because that would preclude me making a fair and honest decision here tonight. And I think I'm prepared to do that.
Thank you. Councilor Miller.
I've had several people approach me, probably a dozen, and for the most part, I have told them I can't discuss it. I've had an email from Gary Gingrich and indicated to him that I could not discuss or have any communication regarding this. I've had communication with Laurel Quackenbush. I know how he feels about the development, and that's all I can say about that. I've had discussion with Judy Ringo because I called her regarding the loss of her partner, and she spoke to me about it, but I did not indicate how I felt about the development. And I recently called Tanner Elliott to find out if the property in question, if it had been annexed into the city, and he said that it had not. And I asked why the city was being part of this, and he said it has to do with the traffic questions.
Thank you. Sometime in early February, I received a telephone call from neighborhood resident Laurel Quackenbush telling me his thoughts regarding the legacy development. Mr. Quackenbush cited several reasons for his opinion. Not being familiar with the issue, I asked Mr. Quackenbush about the zoning, which is a question I commonly ask other citizens regarding land use issues as part of my 33 years in city government. I told him that any further conversation could constitute an ex parte conversation and that I could not discuss the merits of the legacy plan with him. At that point, the conversation ended. On February 20th, I attended a Chamber of Commerce business after hours function at Curtis Development Homes by Cirrhosis Park. On my way out, the developer, Cameron Curtis, and I were introduced. I asked Mr. Curtis if he was the same developer developing the proposed housing development on the east side of the city. Mr. Curtis answered in the affirmative and further indicated that he had planned on meeting with the neighbors. I ended the conversation by telling Mr. Curtis that I thought that would be a good idea. 3 months later, on May 11th, I was approached by my neighbor and local businessman, Tanner Elliott. who questioned me about the fairness of the Plan Commission holding hearings regarding Zoom. He further told me that he had once been interested in purchasing that property and developing it for single-family homes. Mr. Elliott further let me know that based on a letter to the city's Community Development Department from Wasco County Planner Angie Brewer, which he had a copy of, he backed out of his interest in the proposed development because the city and the county wanted more density and hence more housing units than his single-family housing proposal would offer. At my request, Mr. Elliott subsequently sent me a copy of Ms. Brewer's letter. That letter, I asked that it be part of the record, and everyone, that letter is now part of the record. Shortly after receipt of that letter, I contacted Ms. Brewer for two reasons. First, to discuss the letter as it pertains to the zoning history of the parcel, and second, and more important to me at the time, to discuss her remarks in the letter regarding the impact of multifamily, high-density development on the city and county's efforts to expand the city's urban growth boundary. Up to that point, I had every reason to believe that these were what I would consider ex parte conversations that were totally appropriate because I had every intention of disclosing them at the appropriate time. Since mid-May, I have had no what could be considered as ex parte contacts regarding the proposed development. Further, I do not believe that participating in any of these conversations I just described will at all prejudice me or taint my judgment should it be necessary for me to vote. Now, does anyone participating in tonight's hearing wish to challenge the qualifications of any members of the council? Hearing nothing. Finally, in giving and listening to testimony, I'm asking all participants to be respectful of the parties. This applies to the applicant, the appellant, the citizens, the city council, and the city staff. This is a difficult issue for everyone involved, and your civility and respect for all sides and parties would be greatly appreciated. Do the councilors have any questions before we proceed?
I have none. This is Tim McLaughlin. No.
I have none, this Rod.
Linda Miller, no.
No one has indicated they have any questions. So at this point, I'm going to open the public hearing. And with that, we will now move to a staff report.
Well, thank you, Mayor and members of the council. Good evening this evening. Associate Planner Joshua Chandler will be giving the staff presentation. He's been the project planner on this since the beginning. As you earlier introduced, we had Public Works Director Dave Anderson as well attending tonight. The public record on this project is quite extensive. With your agenda packet, I think it totals something like 370 pages. Since that report was released with the accompanying materials, we've also released additional or supplemental information that has come to us after the report packet was distributed. There are additional public comments received, as well as some other background information that was requested. As you stated in your comments, Mr. Mayor, our city municipal code, specifically Title 10, Land Use and Development, has very specific criteria on how the appeals are to be reviewed by the council, and that is included in your city council agenda packet beginning on page 2 of the report. And also included as attachments are the Planning Commission staff reports and the minutes, which give a much more thorough description of the project. And again, the minutes from the various Planning Commission meetings and the resolution coming from the Planning Commission. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chandler, who will be giving the presentation this evening. I also believe that he has a part of his presentation. He has there's a PowerPoint with some exhibits that he'd like to share as well. So if you would, Mr. Chandler.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Mayor, councilors, Joshua Chandler, Community Development Department. As Steve just mentioned, I do have a PowerPoint. I'll be using a share screen, so hopefully it's broadcast. It'll be the main screen that everyone sees. 1 second here. Can everybody view that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So the item on the agenda this evening is agenda or appeal 031-20. This is appeal of Planning Commission resolution 593-20, which denied the appeal 030-20, the administrative decision of subdivision 7419 for Legacy Development Group to divide one 6.92 acre parcel into 72 lots of varying size with a community park. A list of the appellants is on your screen. They're represented by Steve Morash. There is no address assignment at this time for this parcel. The assessor's map and tax information is on the screen as well. Both the comprehensive plan and zoning district designation for the subject property is high density residential. And it's held this designation since June 9th, 1994. Additional information regarding the history of this lot, the zoning history of this lot, can be found on pages 75 and 76 of the City Council agenda packet. I do want to provide one quick correction or two quick corrections to the agenda staff report. They're minor, but I do want to let you know when we were compiling all this information, the appendix numbers shifted. So on page 2, subdivision 7419 is actually appendix 25. It's listed as appendix 1, and staff report 03020 for the appeal. That's actually appendix 7. It was also listed as appendix 1. And then on page 8, the memo from the city engineer is actually appendix 2, not appendix 24. So this is the subject parcel. Give you an aerial view. To the north, we have 10th Street. To the south, 12th. To the east is Richmond Street. This next slide is that zone, the parcel with the surrounding zoning. As you can see, it borders the low density to the south and the east, but it is zoned high density. I provided a project timeline. I won't go through every single date, but the subdivision 7419 was submitted January 10th. It was approved March 9th. The appeal was filed March 19th for the first appeal, 030-20. We went through a couple planning commission meetings, 2 versions of a staff report to address additional information. So then it ended with resolution 593-20 was approved July 16th. The appeal for 031-20 was filed July 24th. And here we are tonight, August 24th for the meeting. As Steve mentioned, there is criteria which is for the filing of an appeal. It is listed in the staff report, and staff found the appeal of everything met. So that's why we are in front of you today. I'll provide let's see here. This is the originally what was proposed, subdivision 74-19, the project scope. As mentioned, 6.92 acres. There's 73 parcels total. 72 of those for dwellings, 1 parcel dedicated as a community park. The dwellings, the sizes range 2,100 to just a little over 6,000, with a community park at about 5,600 square feet. With this proposal, there would be some new streets. East 11th Street running east and west as well. It's a full street dedication, full improvements, and then Bradley Drive running north-south, and that would be a half street dedication as future development on the western side would provide the additional half street. Alleyway access that is proposed to this development provides driveways and garages in the rears of all the lots. This allows for no curb cuts to be out onto the main street. So all, vehicular access will be from these alleyways. This was provided to us by the applicant. It gives us an idea of proposed dwelling types. There's a range of 1 and 2 story single family homes, 2-story duplexes of varying sizes, and triplexes and ADUs. Keep in mind, not one of these is a multifamily dwelling. They are actually all on their own lot. So even the buildings that are all one large building, they are divided by a 0 lot line. There was, after some preliminary findings of the traffic impact study and the conditions of approval, the overall site plan of the development was modified. The traffic impact study is included as Appendix 16, which is the pages 143 to 201 of the agenda packet, and a full list of the conditions of approval can be found on pages 100 to 102 of the City Council agenda packet. You can see on the left-hand side is what I just showed you, the original that was proposed. And to the right is the revised site plan. There are some slight changes to it. There's actually a decrease in the number of dwelling parcels, and they stayed about the same size, square footage, and the community park almost doubled in size. The new streets, we would still have an East 11th Street, would still be a full street, full dedication. Bradley Street on the northern section here would be a full street dedication. One of the reasons Bradley Street moved, and we'll talk about a little bit later, is there was this corner up here. There was a blind hill that was recognized in the traffic impact study, which required Bradley Street to move further down, further to the east, allowing for some ease in sight distance requirements. And these are the two plans side by side for the neighborhood plans. As mentioned, alleyways stay consistent. It's really just a change in the type and the makeup of the buildings. The next few slides, the following slides will provide an analysis into multiple arguments listed by the appellant's attorney in the July 24th memo to City Council. As stated, until the mandatory code criteria are adequately addressed through the public tentative plan review, this application must be denied. This was provided, as mentioned, on July 24th in a memo from the appellant's attorney to City Council and myself. Argument A, I'm not going to read through it, but argument A believes, the appellants believe that the city should deny the application until all off-site safety issues have been addressed. The appellants hired their own traffic engineer to review the traffic impact study as well as our traffic transportation system plan. And in that, they found some areas that needed to be addressed. Some of those based on critical crash rates that were found on some of the intersections. 2 of the intersections found in our transportation system plan, the US 197 in Fremont, as well as US 197 and US 30 were in fact identified in the TSP as having critical crash rates. Staff provided some context into critical crash rating from Susan Wright, engineer of Kittleson Associates. Kittleson Associates, they were the authors of this, the transportation system plan just, I think it was 3 years ago. This is, in your staff report, but being over the critical crash rate signifies more crashes are occurring at a location that would be expected when comparing that intersection to other similar intersections within a study area, but does not indicate that an intersection is exceeding a standard or threshold in the city's development code. Staff is not aware of a city standard or threshold that is not met, and the appellant does not identify one. Staff has included also that, denying the development application until all offsite safety issues have been addressed is further out of context from our code. The municipal code clearly states that the city may deny, approve, or approve a proposal with conditions. This language affords the approving authority the grounds for decision-making actions, providing substantial evidence is provided. As stated in a memorandum provided to Planning Commission prior to the July 2nd Planning Commission meeting, further discussions, staff had further discussions with Kittleson Associates as well as ODOT, and it was determined that the findings of the traffic impact study produced by DKS, who were hired by the developer, provide an adequate assessment of the impacts of the proposed development and the conditions necessary to offset this impact. We also included recently our city engineer. He reported that ODOT has approved an all roads transportation safety grant for the US 97 corridor. And this, and which includes the US 97 Fremont intersection there. And it's scheduled for September 2021. So there's some light improvements that ODOT has planned for September 2021. And although it's not required as approval criteria, many of these safety improvements that the appellants have mentioned are already scheduled by ODOT. Moving on to argument B, this section stated here that off-site roads, which are substandard and unsafe due to grades and narrow roadways and documented excessive crash rates at intersections to be made safe. Staff has provided in our staff report that this section was actually incorrectly cited. Therefore, the criterion does not provide a basis to deny the application. The correct citation references vertical and horizontal curves for sight distance obstructions. And as mentioned, as a result to the blind hill that I pointed out at the northwest corner of the development, Bradley Street was moved. So staff actually correctly addressed that criteria a few months ago. Moving on to argument C. This talks about off-site pedestrian circulation. And one thing that the city of the Dalles is essentially restricted by is House Bill 3479 that was passed in 2013, which the city cannot require street improvements on minor partitions of 3 lots or less and 1 and 2 family dwelling developments. And as a result, there's gaps in pedestrian connectivity that continue to be prevalent throughout the city. Due to this lack of connectivity, the appellants imply that the need for pedestrian circulation and infrastructure improvements, including sidewalks along 10th, 12th, as well as the intersection of Thompson Street, East 10th, and Old Duffer Road, should solely be the responsibility of the applicant. Staff finds that the need for these sidewalks and other infrastructure improvements precluded this application, and that will continue to be an issue as it did prior to 2013. The record simply does not provide a finding that this development alone is the primary driver for these improvements. Argument D, this is talking about, the need, essentially, plans need to be provided to ensure that ADA requirements are met. And yes, ADA requirements have to be met with all development. It's a requirement that the city is well aware of, but as mentioned, the appellants bring this up in their argument. Oregon law requires a 2-step review process for subdivisions. The first step is a public notice and comment period with a tentative plan review. That's what's happening right now. The second stage is a ministerial review of engineered plans. The application, as I mentioned, currently we're in the tentative plan review. In the event that the city approves this subdivision, the applicant will be required to submit full engineer plans that meet all the conditions of approval prior to city staff signing the final plat. So basically, if the conditions cannot be met, this subdivision will not be signed off by city staff. ADA compliance is determined at the engineered plan stage. It's not determined at the tentative plan stage. In 2019, the city of Dallas adopted the ADA transition plan as an amendment to our TSP. The responsibility for implementing this plan is managed by the ADA plan coordinator for the city, who is a licensed engineer with the Public Works Engineering Services Division. Review of all drive approaches, curbs, sidewalks, curb ramps is reviewed by that division of the city. Moving on to argument E. This argument is something that the appellants have brought up multiple times. And this, once again, this argument continues to suggest that individual site plans be submitted for each of the 69 residential dwelling parcels to ensure that lot coverage, on-site parking, driveways, setbacks, etc., have been met. Keep in mind, the city is not approving building placement of individual units at this time. Each parcel will be required to be reviewed through a ministerial application approved by the Community Development Department and Public Works to ensure that lot coverage, on-site parking, all those things that I recently mentioned have been met. After that, there is the process of going through Wasco County building codes to make sure for structural review. Although not required for this, I did mention that, and I showed it earlier, the neighborhood plans, the neighborhood plan or layout provided by the applicant to show the different types of buildings proposed. These plans included dimensions of the parcels, right-of-ways, as well as setback lines. Move on to argument F. This is another, much like argument D, essentially saying that a physical constraints permit needed to be submitted at the tentative plan review stage. Condition of approval number 4, listed both in the subdivision application as well as the appeal, requires that all groundwork activities involving more than 50 cubic yards of dirt, we all know it's going to be more than that, they submit a physical constraints permit. Of course, anything over 250, which this will be, is required to submit an engineered set of plans. Section 10.9.040.050 of the municipal code states that construction drawings and specifications for public improvements are not required prior to subdivision application approval, but are required prior to final subdivision plat approval. This allows a developer to seek application approval prior to investing in public improvement engineering. In the same way, a physical constraints permit for the subdivision, which will include specifications for public improvements, are not required prior to this subdivision being approved. The code also allows for physical constraints permits and subdivisions applications to be reviewed at the same time if chosen by the applicant, but the applicant has requested, did not request a consolidated review at this time. Argument G. Argument G requires that findings, there's evidence shown that this development, that the city's system can take on this development. Staff has mentioned it, multiple times that this application went through a pre-application meeting, as do all land divisions. This happened on August 8th, site team. It happened on our Public Works building with representatives from the city, the county, the Fire and Rescue, Northwest Natural, PUD, and Q Life. The information that we compiled there was given to the applicant. That information was used to guide the development and the subdivision with the utility requirements and engineering standards for the level of services to increase, for the level of service increase that this development will require. The city requires that each one of these lots have full utilities. And to provide that, the applicant is required to extend the main lines of all three of our major utilities: water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater. All those need to be extended up to the parcel to accommodate this development. The city engineer provided me with a memo on August 7th. It has been included as Appendix 2, pages 43 to 49 of the City Council agenda packet. The city's engineering division determined that the city's utility systems do have adequate capacities to serve the development as proposed. This information was derived from the use of the city's computerized hydraulic models of the city's water and sewer systems. And if you would like any more information on that, I would recommend, going to pages 43 to 49. I just kind of did a brief summary for Dale McKay, our city engineer, who's actually unable to be with us today. And next slide is the commission alternatives. They're here in front of you, but the recommendation of staff, I will read staff's recommendation. The other two can be read on the screen as well as in your packet. Staff's recommendation is based on the findings and fact, conclusions of law set forth in the agenda staff report. Move to direct staff to prepare a resolution denying the appeal 031-20 and affirming the administrative approval of subdivision 7419 set forth in Planning Commission's resolution 593-20 with the conditions of approval.
Is that it, Josh?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you. Any volunteers to go first to ask the staff any questions? Council Runyon.
Rod Runyon speaking now. I know the viewers cannot see us as yet, so we'll try to say our names before we speak. I just want some clarification of numbers, Josh, and if you're unable to answer them exactly, you did answer one already for me. There's a lot of paper, a lot of things written from the beginning of the request to now. And so I came across a number of different numbers, and I just want to make sure. And for the purposes of definition, lots and parcels, same thing or different?
Same thing. Yep.
Same thing. That's what I had. You said there are 72, so that answers one of my questions because I have seen 73, 72, and 69.
And I will provide a little clarification on that. So there is technically 73 parcels. Original submission, technically 73. 72 of those happen to be for residential use. There is one for the use of a community park. After some site plan changes, it is now 70 parcels. 69 of those will be for residential use. One will be for the use of a community park.
So 70 lots or parcels, 69 for residential use. Another set of numbers that I've seen is 83 residential units on 72 individual lots, but now we have 69. I've also read with one of those numbers, 11 single-family houses, 7 triplex or townhouse type, meaning 3. 7 of those would be 21. Single-family attached, I took that to mean duplexes. And if there are 20 of those, that would be 40. And that would get us up to 72 residences, 38 buildings. Something's not adding up there.
So that breakdown could have been from the first submission. The first submission, as I mentioned, there was a change in the site plan. I'm not too sure if I included a change in all those building types in the newest staff reports, but it is 69 residential units. 11 of those happen to be single family. Those single family parcels will have an ADU on each. I'm not too sure off the top of my head what the duplex and triplex numbers are, but it should come out to, well, it comes out to 80. So 80 total dwelling units on 69 parcels.
Thank you very much. And I did not include ADUs, accessory dwelling units in that total. And That's all I have to open up here. I have many questions, as we all do, but to get us started, I just want to clarify the numbers, not only for me, but for those at home and everywhere else. There has been a lot of information out there.
Yes, I would agree with that. And it's hard to keep track of the different staff reports and the different appellant appeals and what have you. Anybody like to go next? Counselor Miller.
Why doesn't 11th Street go all the way through to Richmond?
I don't know what map that's from, but it does go through to Richmond.
Doesn't show it.
And which page are you referencing?
Okay. My question's been answered.
Okay.
Oh, I also want to know, originally the community park or whatever was about half the size. It's
Yes.
been increased. It's been increased?
Yep.
Okay, can you give me the dimensions? I see 11,000 square feet. I'd like to know the dimensions.
Roughly 78 by 112. I would have to take some curvature into that. I don't have exact dimensions, but on those are the dimensions I'm pulling from page 141.
Thank you.
Yep.
That all for now? Anybody else like to go next? Counselor Long Curtis.
Yes, so on page 10 of the packet, talks about argument G from the appellant, talks about section 1010.070 and 1010.100, and talks about the public facilities, and it lists the groups that were consulted. And I was wondering why the school district wasn't a part of that, if the fire department, the Q Life, PUD, et cetera, were.
You know, this is a set, and I may need some assistance from my bosses on this. This is the set group, the set team that comes to every site team, or that's invited to every site team. I would imagine school district is on there. We usually don't see Q Life at these. We usually don't see the county. I think just the size of the development, they chose to be there for this one, but I would need to check who all is notified to each of our site teams. We essentially have a template of emails that we send out.
Okay, so when you're trying to determine if the conditions are met, you're saying that the school district is not a normal part of that decision-making.
No, I'm saying I'm not sure I'm not sure why. They're pretty sure they're notified. I mean, I would have to check the list of who's notified, to be honest. I mean, they're also notified for all agencies involved. They're notified during the land use process every time we send out a notice.
I would like
Darcy,
confirmation.
Sorry,
Okay.
Yeah, I
Darcy.
believe I'd like to recognize Dawn Marie Hurd,
Sorry.
who's one of the city planners. Did you want to clarify?
I did. Sorry, thank you, Mayor Mace. We do not have the School District 21 listed as a public agency that we notify for land use applications at this time.
Thank you.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. They just have never been, and in my entire time here, we don't have them on the list to notify. When we do have applications that may impact them, then obviously we do let them know on occasion, but they're not on our standardized list, I should say.
Did you have any other questions?
With kids.
Counselor McLaughlin.
Section 1010.070 and 1010.100A, we're talking improvement of public facilities, including stormwater, remain an unanswered question for me. How will the current infrastructure perform with a substantial build out? The drainage basin calls for city funds to expand the 13th Street plan in the city stormwater plans. If the current stormwater currently terminating at the intersection of Duffer Road and Fremont Street is not completed, Will the water collection system adequately support and serve the proposed development? That's my question.
And I may have to lean on Public Works for that question. I know that the memo that was provided to us recently mentioned what page numbers, 43, pages 43 to 49. Dave, are you able to comment on that one?
Yes, I am. So the stormwater improvements required to serve this development were actually identified in the city's 2007 Stormwater Master Plan. And as a condition of approval, the developer will be constructing those improvements.
That was our Director of Public Works, Dave Anderson, answering that question. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor McLaughlin, anything else?
So the 13th Street North project for stormwater phase 1 and 2, which totals about 2.7 million, actually 2.72 million expected cost. That's what you're referring to? And they will build out that infrastructure?
They will do the portion of that that is required to serve the development. They won't be doing the entire 13th Street North project. But the city has already constructed the trunk portion, the bottom portion for him to for the developer to connect to. So everything's in place for the developer to pick up near Fremont and Old Duffer Road, run up the hill to the development and be able to serve the properties that are being considered in this proposal.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I remember some storm water issues coming down from the east to west down the hill towards Thompson Street. Has that been resolved? I remember there was some flooding along there because there were open ditches. And wouldn't this also contribute to some of that water runoff?
A number of years ago, the city constructed and installed a stormwater system in Thompson Street to help address that. So that trunk system was also is already in place.
Okay, and then beyond what the responsibility of the developer, who will pick up the cost for that projected plan build out for the stormwater system?
For the stormwater system, it could be triggered by additional development. Short of that, those are the types of projects that we've been collecting stormwater SD system development charges, and also the $2 a month stormwater fee. Those funds are used to build the reserves to take on these capital projects. So if it's not triggered by future development, the city would be constructing those. But again, all of the improvements needed to serve these properties are a condition of development for this developer.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Randall, you have any questions?
Yes, in argument A, you mentioned the improvements that are scheduled for the intersection of Highway 197 and Fremont Drive. What about the other ones that have been mentioned by the appellants on 10th and Thompson and Old Duffer Road and Richmond Drive? Are any of those streets considered in this argument?
I do not believe so. They were not included. Included in our traffic impact study was a list of multiple intersections. Those intersections all met the city's current operating standards, level of service standards. The applicant's engineer provided that those intersections could actually increase to 160% and still meet the city's operating standards. So there is not, and Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no planned improvements for the other mentioned intersections.
That is correct.
Excuse me, this is Tim McLaughlin again. Based on current traffic flows in those areas, correct?
Correct.
But with the additional amount, those areas have not been addressed.
So included in our concluded in the traffic impact study, it was found that this development will increase by 82 trips. And those 82 trips were projected into into the I'm spacing right now. We found that the level of service of these intersections meets the city standards.
Okay.
So at that time, and that's what the findings were with those 82 additional trips.
Even with the 82 additional trips.
Even with the 82 additional trips, they could
Right.
increase by 160% and still meet the city standards.
Thank you.
Councilor Randall, did you have anything else?
No, thank you.
I have some questions. Josh, first of all, my apologies for blowing your last name during the introductions.
That's all right.
I don't think some of these questions relate to the criteria, but they will provide me at least with some background information for me to better understand the issues that do relate to the criteria. Most of these questions have been submitted to the staff in advance. My first question has to do with the community park. How is the size of the park determined? Who's going to own the park, develop it, and maintain it?
Well, first, that question was never provided to staff that I am aware of. However, this is it's a privately owned park, and that is how it's currently presented to staff.
So who would maintain the park and who would develop the park? Would it be a homeowners association or something like that?
Homeowners association has been discussed about being created for the area. Nothing has, of course, come through. Nothing has come to the city yet as far as establishing that homeowners association. But yes, that is what's been mentioned multiple times by the developer.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I follow up on that?
Yes, Councilor McLaughlin would like to follow up on that.
If the homeowners doesn't exist, if they don't come up, what happens to that land? Does it stay undeveloped? What happens? If there's no plan presently in place, what's going to happen to that parcel?
Do you understand the question, Josh?
Yes, I understand the question. That would be up to the developer. I guess we would need to ask that question of the developer. It's currently owned by the developer, so we would need to direct that question towards them.
Okay, make a note. Okay, he's coming up next. Okay, my next question is, what is the projected population of the development?
So pulling numbers from the housing and residential land needs assessment, we put some numbers together, a projection of 232. This came from average household sizes, census information. So our calculations were based on, for the 69 regular lots, 2.99 persons a household, which is currently the Dow's average household is 2.4. So it's a little bit of a higher estimate. And then the ADUs were calculated at 2.4, which is probably a little bit higher due to the size of the ADU. So that's 26, so a total of 232.
Thank you. How many parking spaces per dwelling unit is the developer required to provide?
2.
Good.
Also for the ADU?
No.
How many for the ADU?
ADUs are not required to provide parking per the Dallas Municipal Code.
Storage buildings. Storage.
I didn't get this to you in advance, Josh, but I'd like to refer you to page 83, Exhibit 7. And you did address this in the staff report. You said that the applicant is proposing to dedicate 11th Street and on the western boundary Bradley Drive. My question is, what about the alleys and the other accesses into the development, mainly the access that goes in off East 12th Street and the other Bradley? Are those not to be public rights of way?
No, at this time, those were not presented to be public rights of way.
And my question would go to the same with the parks, and that is, who would be responsible for maintaining those private alleys and the other Bradley? Would that also be the homeowners association?
It would be the homeowners association. And one of the things to keep in mind is the city does not oversee homeowners associations. The city does not oversee CC&Rs. That is one reason this information could have not been presented to us at this time. It's been mentioned on multiple occasions that an HOA would be established due to the common area and the spaces that they have. But as I mentioned, the city does not oversee HOAs.
Thank you. Next question is, what is the minimum number of units per acre that the Community Development Department would have accepted to administratively approve the subdivision?
58.
So if they would have presented a plan that called for 57 lots and dwelling units, that would have been denied.
Well, we base everything off of density requirements that are in our municipal code that are based off of the Dallas Comprehensive Plan. It would not meet those density requirements.
Okay, thank you. There's been a couple of questions about this, but my question is kind of specific. What were the circumstances or reason that Legacy reduced the number of parcels from the original 72 down to 69 and doubled the community park? Can you get into the reasons and the circumstances by which that happened?
I think some of it, well, obviously the decision was from the developer. They did not provide us with that information. I'm just looking at it. I believe the fact that Bradley Street had to move, and instead of having a half street dedication, it's now a full street dedication, caused it to move down to the east. I think it was like 150 feet, something along those lines. That probably gave them reasons as to, decreasing the amount of lots that they had. That's a question for the developer, I believe.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I follow up to a couple?
Yes, Council Runyon would like to ask a follow-up question.
Couple of follow-ups to the mayor's questions from a little ways back. Most recently, I think what he's trying to say, as far as the residential high density, 58 was the minimum to get into that area, to get into where it fits the zone. Is that correct?
Correct. That was the number determined by staff.
Okay. The alleys are listed on this diagram. I don't know if it's the most current at 20 feet in width. Is that in line with Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue?
Well, I can't comment for Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue. They were at site team. There was no comments made at that time. They would be able to access, the fire apparatus would have to access on within, I think a structure on all sides has to be reached by 150 feet from a fire main road. So they would be able to access all the lots. I'm assuming this is what their response would be. They'd be able to access all the lots for fire protection on 10th, 11th, 12th, Richmond, and Bradley.
Thank you. One last one, going back to one of your slides. I don't recall which one. The whole process began on January 10th, I believe, and it was approved as far as the planning office to move forward on March 9th. If I'm inaccurate, please correct me. And then an appeal came on March 19th. Was that right?
Yep.
And then it went to the Planning Commission. What is the, and I thought I read this somewhere, what is the number that when a development comes in that it automatically has to go to the Planning Commission? I thought there was a number where it had to go there automatically. Is that not correct?
That's not. There's no static number for the amount of lots presented for it to go to a planning commission. The code clearly states that it has to be, it has to be elevated by either the applicant, the director, I think one other, I can't think off the top of my head what it is, but it was not elevated at the time.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, my next question. Exhibit 7, page 95, the first paragraph, the second sentence says, and I quote, "The staff requires additional clarification regarding the level of improvements being sought by the appellants." My question is, does this statement apply only to the sidewalk issue? And did the
Yes.
appellant ever supply that information?
Well, as far as the details of the sidewalks, no real detail was provided to us. There was a mention in the most recent letter from the appellant saying, you know, has the developer looked into possibly just an asphalt paved walking path? You know, the city requires if a path is going in the right of way, it has to be up to ADA standards and it has to be a full sidewalk improvement. No specifics of this, no specifics were provided. Originally, it started as the applicant needs to provide sidewalks to the development. And it was a very vague request. We didn't know where, you know, did they want sidewalks on both sides of the road, one side of the road? After staff's response that time, it came back that now they want sidewalks down 12th Street to Thompson, down 10th Street to Thompson, as well as addressing this other intersection. So, you know, real specifics were never really provided to staff. One thing that we provided in the appeal staff report 030-20 was the extensive project that, you know, putting in, it's not just simply putting in sidewalks, it's completely updating the road out there, road widening, taking away current right-of-way obstructions, installing curbs and gutters, engineering, everything that goes into it. So it's not a simple request of just installing a sidewalk. So staff was requesting additional information. And if we feel that, you know, the additional information has been vague since.
Thank you. The rest of my questions, I think, would go to Mr. Anderson, our Public Works Director. Dave?
Good evening, I'm here.
Okay. There's several references in the packet regarding horizontal and vertical curves. Could you explain what horizontal and vertical curves are?
Sure. A vertical curve is just a hill, a bump, or a dip in the road. Basically a change in the elevation of the road. A horizontal curve is what we're normally used to thinking about as a right-hand curve or a left-hand curve.
Thank you. I don't know if this information is available, but I'm also asking how much traffic is currently being generated on East 10th Street and East 12th Street during peak hours? Do we happen to know that?
So using information from our 2017 transportation system plan, they did some turning movements counts. And so I have some information for 10th Street as it's leaving and entering that intersection. And right now there's only, well, in 2015, there was only about 38 vehicles during the peak hour, which is between 5 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, turning onto or off of 10th Street at Thompson. I didn't have any information for 12th Street.
Thank you. In your professional opinion, is that 38, understanding it's 5 years outdated, is that comparing apples and apples with the 82 figure?
So the 82 figure, no, not quite. And I want to double check something here real quick so that I give you the correct answer. The 82 trips were, it's not exactly comparable because the 80 number was looking at the traffic generation into the intersection. And right now, the 2015 count, total traffic through that intersection, it was 298. So we would be looking at adding 80 trips to that.
You kind of lost me with that. Can you explain that again?
I'll try. Yes, I'll try. Part of the transportation system plan evaluation that we did for the 2017 plan update was we looked at how the number of trips that were occurring in several intersections around town. And one of those intersections was Old Duffer Road, 10th Street, and Thompson. At that time, there were about 298 trips being generated, or excuse me, 298 vehicles going through that intersection during the peak hour.
Okay, thank you.
The 82 trips in the project or in the traffic impact statement study for this project would add 82 to that 298.
Thank you. Okay, under what kind of circumstances can a city's street classification change? For example, how, if at all, can a minor collector like 12th Street become a major collector?
That would normally require there to be a new destination, for example. Minor and major collectors, the difference is really based on the amount of traffic and if there is some new significant designation or we're doing a new connection from one neighborhood to another. When I say a new destination, I'm thinking about if a new school were built and the traffic associated with getting to and from that new facility was going on what was a minor collector, that might be a really good justification and an increase in traffic to reclassify that as a major collector.
What about an increase in the local population because of a subdivision such as this? Would, if the amount of traffic were to be higher maybe than expected, would that require a study of reclassifying 12th Street, for example?
With the caveat that I'm not a traffic engineer, my impression is no. The numbers that are projected here are well within the numbers that were assumed for that east side area between 10th and 18th and east of Thompson Street within the transportation system plan, and which was a total of 350 new houses somewhere in the area. And with that type of growth, there was no suggestions to reclassify streets. We already had Old Duffer Road as a major collector. We had 12th Street as a minor collector. Those seem certainly adequate to accommodate the new development.
Thank you. My last question for you, Dave. And I apologize, I submitted this 5 days in advance and I suspect you'll need a lot more time to get the answer, but I'm just looking for a ballpark. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to extend sidewalks down East 10th and East 12th to Thompson Street?
We did take a shot at putting together a cost estimate. And I want to lead off by saying this is a very high level conceptual cost estimate. We have not engineered it, but we looked at some, our aerial maps. We tried to make some estimates of how much paving would need to be done from the existing edge of the roadway up to where the new sidewalks and curbs would be. We tried to estimate the number of drive approaches that would have to be constructed and the number of trees that would have to be removed. To go from on 10th Street to extend it from the proposed development down to Thompson was estimated to be about $570,000, all work included. This and on 12th Street would be about $435,000. Now those two cost estimates do include a 20% contingency because we have, as I mentioned, not done any real engineering on this. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. The other thing to keep in mind is the project on 12th Street would serve as a trigger for the next phase of some of those stormwater improvements. Because once we start putting in curbs, then we have to deal with the stormwater in a different way than it's currently being handled. So that would serve as a trigger for some additional stormwater improvements that would come as a cost in addition to those numbers I just gave you.
Thank you. You would be a good engineer if you did not include a 20% contingency. And I promise you, if I'm still the mayor, I will never hold you to that number. Councilor McLaughlin.
And who would be responsible for when that kicks in for those improvements to the stormwater? I know I'm on to this subject, but.
Well, as I mentioned before, if it wasn't development driven, which that section wouldn't be likely development driven, we would use the funds that I mentioned before, the stormwater capital fees that we've been collecting to make these kinds of improvements and stormwater system development charges.
And that appears on the monthly bill as $2 for each person in the city?
For each residential customer.
Resident.
Yeah. Commercials are based on, are assessed based upon how large their facility is.
Thank you.
Councilor Long Curtis.
So I had a question. I don't know if you know this or not, Dave, but when I lived along Thompson Street, city notified residents that they were going to be putting in sidewalks and that they were going to be paying for that. And the neighbors all got together and signed something called a remonstrance. And so they did not put in sidewalks. Do you know if that has ever happened on 10th or 12th Street between Thompson and Richmond?
So that's another option for putting in things like sidewalks. It's called the formation of a local improvement district. If you probably remember that process quite well, that's what was proposed on Thompson, was a local improvement district where there would have been a cost sharing between the citizens or the residents right there along that stretch of road and the city to put in improvements like the sidewalks, and there was also discussion of bike lanes. There was a lot of opposition to it, so that LID or local improvement district was not formed. The project didn't go through. That is an option that can be considered and discussed with the residents if there's a desire to put in sidewalks on 10th or 12th Street.
So is that a reason why there aren't currently sidewalks and improvements along 10th and 12th, or is that has never been proposed by the city to even do that?
There's a project identified in the transportation system plan to install sidewalks on 12th. We don't have a project, but we haven't gotten as far as discussing it with neighbors or actually implementing it. And there hasn't been much discussion about 10th Street. Why they aren't there, back in the day when these areas developed, the construction of sidewalks weren't a requirement as a condition of development.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Okay, I have a few more questions, I guess, for Josh. Josh, in your staff report, page 5. First paragraph. I'm paraphrasing here down to about the third line. Staff has determined the findings of the traffic impact study produced by DKS provide an adequate assessment of the impacts of the proposed development and the conditions necessary to offset that impact. I trust that those conditions are all listed in Exhibit 5, the conditions section. Is that correct?
They're actually included in the previous staff report's conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. All our conditions of approval are referenced in that.
On page 6.
Yeah,
That is
conditions
already-
of approval are listed in this last staff report. Can you repeat the question?
I haven't asked it yet. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My next question is on page 6, the second paragraph, the second sentence, clearly the additional improvements along 10th Street and the intersection of Thompson, 10th and Old Doofer were the additional levels of improvements requested by the staff in the appeal staff report. What happened to that recommendation and what improvements did you guys request?
Improvements were not, improvements were not requested. We were asking for additional information because the first information saying that we just need to have, they essentially said the sidewalks needed to go to the development. It's as vague as that. So we were asking for additional information before we can decipher what exactly they're asking for.
Okay, it does say requested by staff, so that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And I do, if I can speak up real quick, I would like to provide, I'm seeing some chat coming on here on the side. I do want to provide a little bit of clarification. I may have not included a couple keywords. 82 trips generated in the PM peak hour. So I think that will hopefully provide some clarification to a lot of people. And that's what traffic impact studies are based off of. When we do traffic counts, we base it off of the PM peak hour, which is found to be the most effective. It's the highest volume for traffic counts. So I just wanted to provide that because I saw in here that I may have slipped and just said, yeah, this is only going to be 82 trips, period. So.
No, actually, you were quite clear on it. I certainly understood that. I'm not sure Dave was talking about that's why I was asking for the apples to apples comparison, that the 82 trips are during the peak hours.
Yep.
Okay. Yes.
We aren't monitoring the chat for testimony. Testimony comes as you allow it, so that the chat's not being monitored.
The chat is not being monitored, I've been informed. So if anybody,
Not in testimony.
instead of chatting, you might want to make some notes and reserve your comments for the public comment section of this public hearing, which will come later. Okay, Exhibit 7. Page 75. We talk here about the zoning history, which I brought up during my ex parte conversation issue. And pursuant to those remarks that I made regarding the zoning, if one or more members of the city council thinks that the zoning, this parcel multifamily was a mistake, or that circumstances over the past 26 years have changed to make multifamily zoning designation inappropriate, would that constitute a legal or appropriate or legitimate reason to deny the application? I might want to ask our attorney, Mr. Crean, to maybe comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor Mays, members of the council. No, the application has to be reviewed against the criteria that are in effect today. Whether or not this property could have or should have been properly zoned to something else was a discussion that obviously should have occurred and presumably did occur at that time. But this application has to be reviewed under the zoning that's in effect today.
Thank you.
I'll take a break.
I don't need one. On page 80, finding number 26. Oh, we've already answered that. Never mind. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I think we all still have some. We want to share the wealth.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay. Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Rod Runyon, you brought it up just a moment ago. The zoning was done, and if I'm not mistaken, in 1998 to rural high density. And at that time, my recollection is the city was under a lot of stress to figure out where to come up with more land to get in line with the state guidelines that were being pushed out there at the time. But I don't think anybody envisioned an orchard being removed. So still, rural high density or not, somehow there would seem to be some adherence to style of the area. And I'm looking at housing goals, goal 10, and the bullet points on page 41, promoting the development of housing that is complementary with the environment and the surrounding land uses, promote the efficient use of vacant land by encouraging infill development, which is sensitive to existing neighborhoods. And I'm wondering how we got from 58, which would get us into rural high density, to 80 or whatever the final number was, 73 parcels and 80 residential units. It seems like there was room to scale this down somewhat, whether that would have helped the needs of the neighbors in this rural setting or not, I don't know, but it would have been a little easier to take a look at, I think. So what are your answers regarding the planning department regarding goal 10 and those kinds of paragraphs, and there are more, that have to do with compatibility in the area?
Mr. Mays, this is Chris Crane. If I may take at least the first response to that question. There are two things under state law that provide context for that understanding. The first is that the comprehensive plan does not apply directly, and it sounds like you may already know that. The provisions in your comprehensive plan have to be implemented through your development code. And then it's the development code that applies to individual development applications. So that language in the comprehensive plan was presumably implemented in some fashion at some time, but it does not apply directly. The second thing is, in recent years, perhaps last 10, 15 years or so, things have changed at the states. There are statutes now in ORS 197 about 307 to 314 that say that a city can now, for an application for residential development, a city can only apply clear and objective criteria. So that's what happened to a lot of your compatibility standards. They became untenable under state law when the state statutes changed. You could no longer determine compatibility or have those kinds of suitability standards. So a lot of local governments, frankly, still have those kinds of goal 10 provisions in their comprehensive plan, but they're tough to implement through development code because of changes to state law.
I thank you. It's kind of the elephant in the room from a lot of the letters we've received and comments and so forth, and needed to be asked.
We missed.
Do you have any other questions, Counselor?
Not at this time.
Said the state law, we have to change the state law.
Counselor McLaughlin.
I have just one, one more. In the document, Jordan Ramos, PC, Attorneys at Law, on the first page at the bottom, it says appeal issues. Although the property has been zoned RH, high density residential, the city's transportation system plan analyzes traffic for the subject property as low density, which led to inadequate planning in the TSP for transportation infrastructure needed to support high density development. Can someone explain that to me? There is a glaring.
Mayor, this is Dave Anderson. If you'd like, I will try to address that question.
Please do.
So the transportation system plan makes its best guess of what kind of growth or development is anticipated to occur just over the next 20-year period. And in the process of doing that, it allocates certain numbers to different parcels or areas. The TSP showed a fairly low number for this particular parcel, but the transportation system plan is not intended, nor can it be expected to have accurately predict the way every individual parcel will develop. What's important for the transportation system analysis is how much growth was anticipated to occur in that general area. And as I alluded to earlier, for that general area, which was east of Thompson Street, south of Old Duffer Road, the transportation system plan assumed that there might be as many as 350 new homes built in that area. This proposal or this development would address 80 of those 350. So the analyses that we did in the transportation system plan did look at this type or this amount of housing, this amount of traffic, plus a lot more. in that general area over the next 10 years, 20 years, excuse me. And again, the TSP based on, you had to put the growth number somewhere. It had this lot is low and others is higher. It's purely an estimate at the time we're doing the plan. It cannot be considered as any type of restriction, since the analysis that was done did account for this much development and more in that area and the streets that are served by this development. Did that help, Counselor?
Yeah, it brings up more questions, but I'll ask that to the developer later.
Thank you. I had one more question of the staff, unless somebody else would like to. Anybody?
Scott.
Okay. My last question for the staff is on page 93. This probably would go to Dave Anderson. About halfway down under response argument number 11, second paragraph, the draft study was done with traffic counts made during the winter, a week after the holidays, which is an off-peak season. Since the Dells is a summer tourist destination, the study counts need to be redone during the summer months. I was wondering, in your professional opinion, if you thought that the traffic impact study during the summer would make a material difference.
In my professional opinion, I don't believe that it would. And the reason that I say that is actually twofold. One, the traffic impact study done for the development also did a sensitivity analysis. ODOT guidelines indicate that there might be as much as a 60% increase from traffic patterns in the wintertime to traffic patterns in the summertime. And that level of increase is what might be seen on ODOT highways. They also state that those impacts or those changes are a lot less in a residential neighborhood. So, it's something much less than the 60% is probably what's reality. The second reason is that I actually looked at the numbers for, again, I'll pick on Old Duffer Road, 10th Street and Thompson Street intersection. We did the counts associated with the transportation system plan update in April and June and came up with that 298 trips at the peak hour at that intersection. The traffic impact study that was done for the Grove subdivision was done in January in a week of good weather. According to AccuWeather data, it didn't get below freezing the entire week. It was during school. They counted 345, so they're already 47 trips higher than we saw in the spring months. So I think that there's a pretty good correlation already that indicates that there was not a depressed traffic pattern in January when they did it. And even if they did, even if there was a change or an increase, the DKS traffic study did a sensitivity analysis and identified that the intersections would still function at 160% more traffic than they're predicting. So that takes it from 80 up to what, 230 or something like that. So they've already done a sensitivity analysis and there's a lot of room for error and still have the intersections function adequately.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I want to make sure I understand that is it 298 trips or 398? The bulk of that traffic, and I've been through there many, many times at Old Duffer, 10th and Thompson, the bulk of that traffic doesn't go down East 10th or East 12th, does it?
No,
Yeah.
this is, that 298 is total vehicles coming through that intersection. It might be coming down Thompson and turning right on Old Duford to Fremont. It might be coming the reversed route, might be turning left and going east on Old Duford Road or east on 10th Street. It is, the bulk of that traffic is not going down the section of East 10th and East 12th that are immediately adjacent to this development.
And how about the 82 cars during peak hours?
The 82 cars during peak hours would be the total amount of traffic generated by the development into the entire transportation system. Some of that will find.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say some of that may find its way to the Old Duford Road and Thompson Street intersection. Some of it may go down Richmond Street. You know, it's going to split and go the most direct route to its destination.
So the 82 cars is a foregone conclusion that the vast majority of the 82 cars are going to be using Richmond, 10th Street and 12th Street. Correct?
I think that, I believe, yes, I believe that's accurate.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions for the staff?
But Mayor, I guess
Yes.
with one caveat, there'll be a new street that'll be constructed called Bradley Drive, and a lot of that might be using Bradley Drive to enter directly onto 10th Street.
Right, thank you. Any more questions for the staff? Okay, we will now move to the presentation from the applicant. I trust that that would be Mr. Jamie Housley, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, but before I begin, I want to introduce my client, the developer, Mr. Curtis, for just to say a few words.
Mr. Housley, can you speak up, please?
Yeah, can you hear me?
No, it's difficult.
Barely.
Is that better?
A little better.
Okay, I'm sorry. Before we begin, I was hoping that Mr. Curtis, the developer, my client, can just introduce himself real quick, and then I'm going to tee up my PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Okay, you realize you have 10 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Curtis?
Good evening. My name is Cameron Curtis. I'm here with my wife, Emily Curtis. We are owners of Curtis Homes, as well as I'm the president and part owner of Legacy Development, along with my partner, Dick Smith, and also our project manager, Greg Hagberry. I really appreciate your time this evening and consideration for the development that we're proposing, and look forward to Jamie and his presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Housley?
Yes, are we back on? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So again, I want to appreciate Mr. Chandler and Mr. Anderson and Mr. Crean. I think they gave a lot of very good background and answered a lot of your questions. And I'm going to try to go through my presentation fairly quickly and then try to address some of the questions that the city council members and the mayor asked with my 10 minutes. And I'm assuming we'll have some more discussion after that. First of all, again, I just want to remind it's the city's council's role here to decide whether or not the subdivision satisfies the clear and objective criteria under the development standards. And again, the development should be considered under the zoning when the development application was submitted. That's been the same zoning that has been there since 1994, according to Wasco County. And I think Mr. Crean identified that pretty clearly. Again, in the March 9th, 2020 staff report that approved the development, this demonstrates how it met all of the criterion or met the criterion through conditions of approval. And I'm just kind of going through all these various things to, again, show that the staff findings that are in the original staff report either showed how some were not applicable, like finding 15, they could be met with conditions of approval as under finding 16, or they were met entirely, going on and on and on. And I believe that the city council has this, was sent to the city earlier today, so you can review it for additional details. But again, I just wanted to highlight that the staff had approved this originally prior to the planning commission appeal with approval with conditions, and we believe that the development does meet all of the code criteria. So now moving along to the opponent's arguments here, and I appreciate Mr. Marash's letter. Again, we disagree with some of the statements in there. In particular, section 10.10 060A5 A and B, they state that it requires a denial until all safe streets are approved. The code, again, does not mandate a denial. The code, what it says is the city may deny, approve, or approve with proposal conditions necessary to meet those standards, and that construction of offsite improvements may be required to mitigate resulting from the development. And I think Mr. Chandler sort of indicated how the development of this project met all of that through their analysis. And simply put, it's not really the requirement of the city code for the developer to come in here to be compelled to reconstruct block after block of inadequate city streets. It's really to address and mitigate for the impacts caused by the development. The next argument that they raised relates to 10.6050-040B, which requires that offsites be reconstructed. And I think Mr. Chandler and Mr. Anderson did a good job of addressing this. And this again goes to that issue of the vertical curve, which is, you know, land use speak for a hill. And that the code here required that elimination of the vertical curve along Bradley and 10th, and therefore Bradley Street was moved into the interior of the development, where we'll be doing a full street dedication there. It moves on to 11th, and then a half street dedication on the south end of Bradley. The next argument that the opponent raises is that offsite sidewalks must be constructed. And here, Mr. Chandler, I think, did a really good job, both in his presentation tonight, but in the staff report as well, correctly noting that sidewalks are no longer required for partitions, which created the gaps in the sidewalks here that preceded this application. It's not incumbent upon us there to fix those existing gaps. The opponents also raised the issue of how the ADA standards were not met. I think Mr. Chandler did a good job of describing the two-step process that development go through. You know, one, there's the land use issue, which is before us, and then there'll be a subsequent development review associated with engineering conditions that'll talk about all of that. But in particular, that's where ADA issues will come up and make sure that they're in conformance. But in addition, the ADA details are shown on sheets 18, 18.1, 18.2, 18.3, 18.4, 18.5, 18.6, 27, and 29 for the record.
Raise your
hand. The opponents raised this issue about the 60% lot coverage standard not being met. Again, this is not a requirement for the subdivision approval. This will be addressed later when building permits are submitted, and I believe Mr. Chandler addressed that. This is derived from the fact that our client provided to the city a schematic of what the buildings may look like in the development. But you can get, when the building permits are actually pulled, that's when you review things for setbacks and lot coverage and those other things. So that's a review cycle that comes a bit later. The opponents raised this minor issue that a physical constraints permit is required. From our view, the physical constraints permit may, at the request of the applicant, be processed simultaneously under 10.802.010A. We've not asked for that. So again, that's another one of those issues that will come about in an additional review, as mentioned by Mr. Chandler. There was a lot of focus on the city's lack of utility capacity. Again, I think that the city's engineer's memorandum and master plan that they provided in their August 12th letter and additional testimony are substantial evidence, as well as Mr. Anderson's testimony tonight, that there is adequate capacity to serve sewer, water, and stormwater for this development project. And again, we could see that in the city engineer's memo. Here's the city's water system. As it can be seen at the table, the bottom of the attached water model results map for the Grove subdivision. Both the ADD and MDD demands of the development can be met while still providing available fire flow to the area. The city sanitary sewer at the bottom of the table attached to the sewer model results map of the Grove shows that the downstream piping has adequate capacity to handle the flows from this project. And then finally, the city stormwater, again, there is adequate capacity to accommodate the stormwater from this development once those lines are tied in. Now, turning to, I know you guys had a lot of questions, and I'm sure you'll still have a lot more to follow up with, but I wanted to address the ones at least I remembered off of the top of my head. First, there was a question regards to the park and how that will be maintained. The intent there again is that'll be a park owned by the Grove HOA and maintained by the HOA. The expansion of that park came about, one, mostly because of our client's discussion with the neighbors and realizing that there was additional need in the area. And so they did expand it for that reason. The change from Bradley Road to the internal part of the development also created that opportunity to do that expansion. But again, the intent there was to help accommodate some additional need in the area. As far as the alleys are concerned, those will be private in nature, but there are public easements in them for the utilities to address. And I believe that, again, as far as the fire issue is concerned, you would have Richmond, Bradley, 10th, 11th, and 12th to be able to serve the development as far as that's concerned. Mr. Mayor, I know you had asked a question in regards to where some of the trip data can be found specifically. I think if you go to page 176 of the packet, there's the existing trips for Thompson and 12th from the February 2020. And then if you go to page 181, it'll have the 2023 PM peak trips.
You have about 30 seconds left, Mr. Housley.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing I would want to address is I know the question or the elephant in the room came up, and I think Mr. Crean astutely noted this, and this was the issue of the livability criteria. Again, he's correct that state law was amended to that you need to have clear and objective criteria that an applicant is required to meet. And therefore, a lot of these livability stuff that may be sort of vestiges of old comp plans aren't really critical to the analysis here before you this evening. So I do want to state that I do agree with my colleague as far as that is concerned. Again, we hope that you deny the appeal here and affirm the Planning Commission and staff, and we believe that this project will bring needed housing to the city of the Dalles, and we look forward to welcoming new neighbors to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. That was 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and Mr. Marash will have 10 minutes and 30 seconds to present his case should he choose to use it. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Housley? I have a few. Once again, I'd like to ask some questions that have nothing to do with the criteria, and it's background information for me. You've already addressed the park issue. Thank you very much. How much do you expect these homes to sell for? Single family homes, for example, do you happen to know at this point how much they would be on the market for?
I don't. I'll ask my client right now while you ask me additional questions. Thank you.
Mr. Curtis?
At this time, we have not prepared any pricing at this point. We are taking it on a step-by-step process. I think what I would say is it is absolutely the passion and desire of Legacy Development as well as Curtis Homes to meet the need of our community. And so our desire with this development has always been from the beginning to be attainable for our community, specifically for workforce housing and the missing middle, the community that has a hard time obtaining housing right now within our own community. And so it's our desire to meet that, but we haven't established pricing. We haven't established whether they're for sale or for rent and what the quantity numbers are. That will be farther down the road when we get closer to building. Thank you.
Thank you. Will all the utilities be underground?
Yes.
All of the utilities will be underground.
Thank you. On page 51, Mr. Housley,
Yes.
The appellant describes this as a very unique situation because of the sidewalk issue and the gaps and all that kind of thing. Are you willing to concede that this is also, would you also agree with him that this is a unique situation as described in that the surrounding properties are already developed without sidewalks? And it's fair to say that the sidewalks would never get built unless the adjoining property owners do it, or the developer does it, or the city does it. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that when you're doing new development such as this and greenfield development such as this, that often it is you're required to do the frontage improvements and do those additional sidewalks. And oftentimes, even in redevelopment projects, whether you're in other cities in the state, as other info comes in, they'll either develop those sidewalks as that occurs, or I think, can't remember if it's Mr. Anderson or Mr. Chandler or Mr. Crean, who I know we have a lot of familiarity with this. There is the possibility of doing local improvement districts to prepare additional infrastructure for sort of substandard areas. That's a very effective tool, both for the public and private side, to sort of band together and work on those areas where the gaps may exist.
Okay. Councilor Runyon.
I want to ask a question regarding parking. We heard earlier about 2 parking spaces. Was that for each residential unit or for each building? Because if we have a triplex, it would seem to me we would have 6 parking places. A duplex would have 4. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, because it's a 0 lot line development, so a triplex would be viewed as, 1 unit here, 1 unit, 1 unit. And so each one of them would have 2 parking spaces. So collectively that building would have 6, but each separate unit has 2.
I'm not sure I heard you correctly. So if it's the triplex, there would be 6?
It would be 6, but each separate unit has 2.
Okay. Are there any carports or garages?
I can address that.
Sure.
We have provided the neighborhood at our neighborhood community meeting some initial concept plans and architectural renderings of what we are proposing the neighborhood to look like. And I know there has been a lot of questions and concerns around parking, and to affirm what Mr. Housley is saying, we are providing adequate parking for every unit that is there. The plans that we have right now have garages associated with each of the single family, duplex and triplex units. So there is back alley access, driveway parking, as well as garage parking for each of the units.
So the alley would be used for overflow parking. Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. The alley will not. You wouldn't be allowed to park in the alley. It will only be for accessing your driveway, which you could park in your driveway, or you can park in your garage. Each of the units that we are planning on building will have a garage and a driveway with parking. So we'll actually provide more parking than what's required by the city.
Have you given any thought to overflow parking at the end of each area or anything like that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's why we have designed the homes to have garages as well as driveways, so that you can, as Josh and the city staff has alluded, the plan is required to have 2 parking spaces, but assuming a duplex has a 2-car garage, which is the plans that we propose, we would have a 2-car garage allowing for 2 interior spaces, as well as a driveway, which allowed for 2 exterior spaces. So we're actually providing double the amount of parking that's required.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor McLaughlin.
Finding 14 on the PowerPoint, lots are alley loaded. I can make an assumption, but I don't know what that means.
That means that the orientation of the house is, you walk right up to the front door. But the intent is for the cars to have the access for the cars or vehicles for those particular houses would be in through the alley for parking in the garage or on the driveway space.
That is correct. And just to affirm as well, the desire of the neighborhood was to really have a beautiful feel to it. And so we wanted to keep our curb appeal up. That's why we didn't have garages facing the main streets, but intentionally designed it to have rear loading alley access. So all the cars accessing the driveways would come through that and park in the back of the house, leaving a really nice curb appeal.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, page 51. Under the applicant response to the appeal, about 2/3 of the way down. Fourth sentence. The applicant will pay the proportional share of its impacts through the system development charges. Now, I understand that system development charges are not supposed to go directly to the development. I think they're put in a separate fund and with other SDCs. But I just, someone who goes through there a lot, I've walked that the 10th Street and 12th Street. I happen to think under their present condition, it's an extremely unsafe condition. Would you be willing to concede that the developer, what he pays in system development charges would pale in comparison to, say, putting in sidewalks along 10th and 12th?
No, I guess I would not be willing to concede that. I believe that, again, we have met the criteria, clear and objective criteria identified in the code. And again, the city is collecting SDCs for that they can decide how to utilize throughout the rest of the infrastructure. That could include, utilizing that to do other types of projects, such as doing sidewalks.
Thank you. Page 52. The developer is paying $115,000 in SDCs. The developer is also paying the cost of bringing in water, sewer, stormwater, and the cost of private utilities. The appellant is saying that a proportionality analysis is required. Have I got that so far?
That's what I think Mr. Moore raised, yes.
Okay. I guess I'm trying to nail down what this proportionality, maybe I'll address this to the appellant, but they talk about the Dolan proportionality analysis requires that the impacts of the proposed development be quantified and weighed against the proposed exaction. So I learned a new word today, exaction. Is that what the word exaction refers to, is all those costs that are going to be incurred by the developer?
Yeah, an exaction, you can think of it as a charge that is a developer subject to mitigate for different conditions.
Okay. Let's say that the cost to improve 10th and 12th in Richmond with sidewalks and whatever might be necessary to install the sidewalks is, let's say it's $1 million. And Dave, again, I want to let you know that I'm not going to hold you to that number, but I'm trying to make a point here. So you're saying that if the developer was required to make $1 million of improvements, that would be disproportional to what exactly?
Well, I want to be very, very careful here. I think Mr. Morash raised this in his appeal letter. And
correct.
Again, I want to be very clear that the Planning Commission decision didn't rely on any sort of Dolan analysis to justify the approval and the conditions there. Although it was discussed at the prior hearing, it wasn't part of their final written decision. And again, so from our perspective, there isn't a necessary proportionality analysis necessary here. We seem to think that this is creating an omission where none really exists and it's not necessary.
That's fair. Thank you. I'll take that up with Mr. Marash. Okay, page 58. That's the last page of your appeal or your statement. The very last paragraph, second sentence. We can appreciate the discomfort created by the development in existing neighborhoods, and the applicant is making the appropriate upgrades to the city's infrastructure, which in the long run will benefit the entire area. So can you please describe what appropriate upgrades to the city's infrastructure the developer is making that will, quote, benefit the entire area in the long run?
Well, I mean, first of all, we'll be extending water, sewer, and stormwater lines, which additional properties will be able to tap in as either they develop or redevelop. We will be doing those frontage improvements along the various roadways, and we've addressed that substandard vertical curve issue on Bradley by redesigning the project to accommodate that topographical issue. We've also, at our own election, decided to expand the park, doubling the size from the original proposal. So all in all, we've done a lot of different things as a result of this project that we believe will not only serve for the city for the affordable housing that Mr. Curtis mentioned and try to attack the missing middle issue. We do believe that that this is under the needed housing aspect in the state of Oregon. And we believe that all of these additional infrastructure improvements that we're providing to the area will help the city in the long run meet its comprehensive plan objectives.
It sounds to me like you're defining the entire area as the subdivision. Is that correct, or am I assuming that correctly?
Well, no, it's the subdivision is on the actual parcel, but the extension of the urban services to that area can help facilitate the rest of that development and fulfillment of the city's zoning in the area.
Okay. Page 5 of the staff report. You with me?
Sorry, it's a little slower to do this in computer, not on paper.
That's okay. I'll wait. It's response to it's your response to the appellant's argument C toward the bottom of the page.
In the staff report?
Yes, sir. Page 5.
Okay. I guess, could you point me exactly to what paragraph you're referencing?
Yes, it's a response to appellant's argument C toward the bottom of the page.
Okay, and appellant's argument 12, is that the one where you're talking?
No, it just says response to appellant's argument C. It's toward the bottom of the page on page 5. And it talks about, it starts out with the House Bill 3479.
Yeah, okay.
You with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, the last sentence of that paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay, the record simply does not support a finding that the need for off-site sidewalks identified by the appellant is driven primarily by this application.
Yes.
You have quotes around the word primarily, and that's because that's the appellant's statement. He used the word primarily. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, my question for you is, are you willing to concede that the record would support a finding that the need for off-site sidewalks identified by the appellant is driven significantly by this application as opposed to primarily?
I wouldn't agree with that statement, no. I think that—
Okay, you think significantly is a little strong?
I think significantly would be strong, and again, this is sort of one of those things where development's coming to an issue where there was substandard gaps created.
Okay. So you don't like the word significantly. How about moderately?
I have to think about that, Your Honor.
Okay. My last question, and you're going to have to work with me on this.
Sure.
Because I'm not a traffic expert and your traffic person is not here. Is that right? TKS?
That's correct.
Okay. And I want you to poke holes in my thinking here because I'm not a traffic person. I looked at an aerial map of that area bounded by 10th Street on the north, 12th Street on the south, Richmond on the east, and Thompson on the west. It was difficult looking at an aerial photo because I'm sure that there's large garages I might have counted as a house, and there might have been some small ADUs that I didn't count. But let's just say that for the sake of argument, that in that area I just described, there was 100 homes. And I don't think it's that far off, but let's just say for the sake of argument, there's 100 homes. If I am off on that, it's not going to render my point invalid. So let's say there's 100 existing homes that are currently using that current street network, primarily 10th and 12th Street. And your traffic impact study indicates that the proposed subdivision will generate 82 additional cars using that street network during peak hours. So you have 80 dwelling units and you have 82 cars. Roughly, that's one trip per dwelling unit during peak hours. Is that correct?
So again, I want to be very clear, and I think Mr. Chandler astutely noted here, the correct amount of units being created by this project is 69 units and 1 for the park. So the PM peak hour trip ratio is probably because there's more than 1 trip per house during the PM peak period. So I just want to make that really clear. So there was a lot of, in the early discussion, trying to clarify exactly how many units were there. So I don't want to confuse the public about that.
Well, I just took the 69 that you decided, plus I added the 11 ADUs, and that comes to 80. And again, if you use 80 and then you use the 82, that's roughly 1 trip per household during peak hours. Okay. Like I said, I'm inviting you to poke holes in my thinking here. Okay. So if you're adding 82 cars to the existing, let's say 100 cars, does it stand to reason that you're increasing traffic in the area by 82%? Where am I going wrong?
If there was 100.
If there were 100 homes in that area currently, from 10th Street to 12th, from Richmond to Thompson, and they're generating 100 cars during peak hours, does it stand to reason that you'd be increasing traffic by 82%, which is the increase from 100 to 182?
If there were 100 PM peak trips in the existing model and you added another 82, yeah, that would be the math.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Fine.
Okay. There are no other questions. We'll move to the appellant, Mr. Steve Marash.
I have a quick one.
Okay.
I remember in the past when we approached the 8 o'clock hour procedurally, we have to at least stop and make a motion to continue anything, and I just request a short break.
Okay, I think that's pretty fair. Does anybody have any objection to taking a 10-minute break?
No.
Okay, I'm declaring this a recess, and we will reconvene sharply at 8 o'clock sharp. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay, we're reconvening the public hearing. Thank you for bearing with us. And we are now done with the staff report and the applicant's presentation. I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Steve Marash for the presentation for the appellant. Mr. Marash, I'd like to remind you, you have 10.5 minutes to make your presentation.
Can't hear you.
Third one in on the top.
Up next to us.
He's on mute.
Nice.
Mr. Marash, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, that was weird. Mine said unmute. Mine said unmute, but I guess it wasn't. But I got it unmuted this time. I apologize. Technical difficulties here.
Did you hear the part where I said that you got 10.5 minutes?
I did. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
And I will try to be brief, and I will refer to my written letters and incorporate those here in today instead of repeating all the arguments. I'm only going to go through two of the most important issues. I'm going to highlight those. If there's questions, I'm happy to talk about the other issues. And I'd also like to request 7 days. If any new evidence comes in, I'd like to statutory 7 days to respond to it. I haven't heard any new evidence yet, but to the extent some might come after I talk, I want to make sure I'm on record. So I'm going to focus just on the two I think are the critical issues here, and that is traffic safety and pedestrian safety. I'm going to try to look at the camera. I keep wanting to look up at myself on the video, so I'm going to try to look in the camera so you can see me a little better. But traffic safety, I think, is a key issue here, as is pedestrian, obviously. With regard to traffic safety, there's been a lot of discussion of the transportation system plan, and is it a criteria? Is it inadequate? What is it? And I heard testimony from one of the city engineers that there's a total of 350 trips within the study area in the transportation system plan that were envisioned for this area, and that this project only contributes about 80. So it's 23% of the total. But if you look at the map, which is also attached to Han Lee's report, I don't know if you can see it, but the subject property is a really tiny, it's maybe 2 or 3% of the total area for that 350 trips. So you've got one development taking 23% of that huge area in trips. So there seems like there's a disconnect in the TSP itself. And our traffic engineer, Han Lee, points out that the TSP says that this intersection, Fremont and 30, is already over the critical crash rate. And so he's suggested, and where they're listed in my letter and his, a number of things, studies that should be done, or a number of points that should be looked at in a more detailed study of that issue. Now, what I've heard in response to that is, well, maybe ODOT's going to do, they got some grant, they might do something to that area, but I don't see the grant in the record. I don't see any detail about what ODOT is going to do. And I haven't seen that has been studied by any of the traffic engineers. So I don't think that you can rely on that without further detail. Mr. Lee has pointed out what we think needs to happen to study that intersection to show it's going to be safe with the development. And the original DKS report didn't do a full analysis. They did a queuing analysis, which was a limit analysis. And then Kittleson came with their report and said, oh, you know what, we don't need to do any more study, and they give a bunch of reasons. Our engineer wasn't satisfied with those reasons, and he still thinks that needs to be studied more. And so we would like to see additional study that would look at both what ODOT's proposing and the issues that our engineer has specified. Now, the applicant's other response and the city's response has been, well, this is it's not a requirement to make this intersection safe. I heard city staff say, we haven't identified a city safety standard that isn't met. Well, the staff report doesn't identify what the city safety standards are. They're not listed in the approval criteria. Now, these are different than operational standards. The code refers to both operational and safety standards. So I haven't seen where the city has pointed out, well, these are our safety standards and here's why they're met. So we think that's deficient. The city's own TSP seems like it's good guidance on a safety issue such as this. I would also point out that the code section that says the city, I'm referring to code 10.060A5 sub A, says the city may, and that's the word the applicant is focused on. The city may, the next word, deny. So that's one of the things you may do. You may deny. City may deny, approve, or approve a proposal with conditions necessary to meet operational and safety standards, provide right-of-way for improvements, and to require construction of improvements to ensure, that sounds mandatory, consistency with the future planned transportation system. So that sounds like they're referring to the transportation system plan. Subsection B of that very same section says, construction of off-site improvements may, again, they're going to point to that word may, but I'm going to point to the next two words, be required to mitigate impacts resulting from development that relate to capacity deficiencies and public safety, and or to upgrade to construct public facilities to city standards. So here in subsection B, that public safety is in addition to the city standards because he uses and or in that section. So we don't think that any of this has been met based on the record because it hasn't been studied enough, and that's what our engineer says. So maybe if they look at this issue in a little more detail following our engineer's recommendations, they might get there. We just don't know. On this record, we think denial is the only option on that issue. Now, moving on to sidewalks, I've cited an email in my most recent appeal letter that I submitted yesterday, August 21, about a little girl who walks in the weeds and sloping terrain because cars drive too fast and the road is too narrow. And she has to walk in the ditch, which is not flat, and there's rocks, and she fell and she had a concussion. I mean, that's a pretty significant safety issue. And I guess the city and the applicant's response is, well, we're not primarily causing that. And I agree, I probably should have used the word significantly in my letter or substantially. But but on the issue of safety, yes, it's an existing condition, but this new development is going to add 80 new dwelling units with 80 new peak hour trips, many of which are going to drive on this road with a narrow section with no sidewalk and a ditch. And they're also going to add a lot of new people that are going to live there. So they're going to send new pedestrians down there as well. And I think the code's pretty darn clear on these sidewalk issues. And I've cited them on page 3 of my letter and quoted section 10.10.040E states off-site improvements to ensure improved access between a development site and an existing developed facility, such as a commercial center, school, park, or trail system. So you got a commercial center on one end and schools, and you got on the other end of town, clear out at the end, this new development. So this says you got to ensure improved access. It says the approval authority may require off-site pedestrian facility improvements concurrent with development. Off-site, that doesn't mean frontage, that means off-site, that means down the street. The next section we cite, 10.10.040B, it defines safe and convenient pedestrian facilities. It says that they strive to minimize travel distance to the extent practical, shall be provided in conjunction with new development. There's that word shall be. Within and between new subdivisions, planned developments, commercial developments, industrial areas, residential areas, and neighborhood activity centers, such as school and parks. So these sections sound to me to be pretty darn mandatory. And certainly the city could use its discretion to deny this application because they haven't studied the issues. They haven't studied the sidewalks. They say, well, the appellant needs to do that. The appellant needs to go out and study the sidewalks and decide exactly where the sidewalks need to be built. But it's not the appellant's job to design the application. That's the applicant's job or the city's job to review it. We've pointed out that there are clear deficiencies in the safety of this particular section of street between the downtown area and this development. And we've pointed out the code that says that developers are supposed to provide safe and convenient pedestrian connections between these two areas. And so we think the code is pretty clear and that this can't be approved without further addressing sidewalk safety. And we can get into the Dolan argument if you want. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but I noticed that the city engineers, I heard 435,000 was all it would take to put sidewalks down at least one of these two streets, which would certainly be an improvement because that would give one safe route. And I heard 435,000 based on 80 dwelling units. That's like $5,500 a dwelling unit. I don't know how much these are going to sell for, but that's got to be a very small percentage of the price of these units. And so, I mean, I would just ask, you know, what's the price of the public safety? Both the existing residents that have to walk along the ditch and now are going to be faced with all this new traffic, and the residents of the new facility that are also going to have to do the same thing. And we think that it's absolutely required under the code, under the sections I just walked through, and that if the city did need to do a Dolan analysis, that one probably could be met under these circumstances. But we're not even to the point of doing the Dolan analysis yet, because there just hasn't been a study of what actually is it going to take to make these sidewalks safe. And unless there's any questions, that really summarizes our position.
Thank you. 9 minutes and 45 seconds. Nice job.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Marash?
Just clarification. So when you mentioned sidewalks, you were talking in terms of sidewalks around the development acreage itself, not all the way to Thompson or all the way to Old Duffer Road.
No, we're talking about all the way. That's what I heard was only going to cost $435,000 to do it on one of the two streets. And that's where the safety issue is.
10th Street.
Yeah, that's not.
No, it was 12th Street. 12th Street, yeah.
And if that's too much, there's other options to look at. Widening the asphalt and striping, maybe put in a bike lane, that's going to be even less money, but it's something that hasn't been looked at, but pedestrians.
You
can
answered my question. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anybody else? I have a few. Page 215. Which I believe is your appeal. Argument 12. Are you with me?
I am. I think that's the staff report. It looks like argument 12 is quoting one of our earlier appeals.
Yeah, it mentions 720 to 840 new average trips based. That's not right, is it?
I believe that is right. That's average daily trips. That's not peak hour trips.
Yeah.
It's pretty close to right.
So 10 trips per day per family?
That's pretty close to right on average daily trip, yes.
Okay.
That's not peak hour. It's one peak hour.
No, yeah, I understand. That just seems very high to me, but that's all right. Like I've said, and you'll hear me say it again, I'm not a traffic expert. Page 60 of your appeal. Never mind, that question has been answered. Page 61, this has to do with the proportionality analysis that I was asking Mr. Housley about that was probably better suited to ask you. The very last paragraph, are you with me?
Yes.
The Planning Commission appeared persuaded by the staff's argument that any solution to the safety issues would be disproportional to the impacts of the application. In the absence of a proportionality analysis, lack of proportionality cannot be used as a basis for approving an unsafe development. So my question is, what are the disproportional impacts of the application?
We don't think that they would be disproportional. We think it would be proportional to require them to do sidewalk improvements between the development and downtown down to the nearest sidewalk. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
So the cost of improving 10th and 12th What, okay. their
Yes, or
argument-
maybe
their-
just one of the two.
Yeah.
But what you would do with a proportionality analysis is you look at the impacts of the development. And this is under the Dolan v. City Tigard case, which came out of the city of Tigard, Oregon, and went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1994. The Supreme Court established this new test called proportionality. And what it looks at is impacts of the development. And in this case, you've got 80 new lots going in. So the impacts would be, how many new traffic trips are they generating that are going to these areas? And how many new pedestrian trips are they generating that are going to go to these areas? And those are the impacts. And so you have to, under the test, you have to balance that against the exaction that you're going to charge. In this case, it would be the SDCs plus whatever you might say they have to do to fix the problem. Now, there was some mention they're going to pay SDCs, but as I understand, there's nothing in those SDCs that's going to go towards fixing these sidewalks. And I don't think there's anything that's actually scheduled to go towards fixing the intersection. But to do a proportionality analysis, you look at the amount of those SDCs, where that money's going, and then you'd add to it whatever the city decides needs to be fixed in order to approve the development. That goes on one side. You picture the scales of justice. That goes on one side of the scale. On the other side, you add all the new traffic and pedestrian trips generated by this development and kind of where those are going. And those things have to sort of roughly balance out, roughly proportional. The Supreme Court has been clear there's no mathematical precision is required, but some math is required. So I hope that helps to answer the question. In the Dolan case, the city of Tigard was demanding a bike path to be dedicated and a floodplain. And that's what the property owner was objecting to. And ultimately that case, after the Supreme Court was decided, got litigated by my old firm. And I won't bore you with the details, but anyway, that in a nutshell is the Dolan proportionality rule.
Okay, thank you. Page 62. Second paragraph, second to last sentence. Are you with me?
Yeah, I think so. The solution would be for the application to be approved at a lower density in order to maintain safety.
At the intersection of 97 and Fremont, right?
Yeah, that's the intersection being referred to there.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so right now the density sits at, as I understand it, 11.6 units per acre, depending on the ADU issue. Are you saying that you would be satisfied with a development with a lower density?
Yeah, I don't know if our clients would be satisfied with 58 or not. This is kind of the first time that issue has really been discussed. And then, we get into the historic zoning and some of the other issues. I know that there is a lower density that they would agree to. I don't know if 58 is, that's certainly better than 80. But I haven't conferred with them or with our engineer to determine if that is low enough.
Okay, so you don't know at this point. Okay, that's
No, I think at this point we would recommend just denying it until the further study of both the sidewalk and the traffic engineering work has been done based on the criteria, and that would be based on the criteria I went through in my verbal, and also they're listed in my letter.
Okay, in the last paragraph on that page, sir, you've made a point throughout that a local government may find that the approval standard can be met through conditions only if there's substantial evidence in the record to support a finding that any needed technical solutions are possible, likely, and reasonably certain to succeed. As I said, you've been making this argument consistently. It sounds like you're suggesting that the city's not capable of ensuring that the conditions are in fact possible, likely, and reasonably certain to succeed prior to the approval of the final plat. Am I assuming correctly or incorrectly?
I don't know that I would phrase it that way. This comes from a set of, and this refers more to the issues that I haven't gone into in my verbal presentation, the other issues in the letter. I think the primary one there is at the Planning Commission, we were asserting that they needed to do a little bit more, not full engineering drawings, but a little bit more in terms of that sketch that shows the colors of which dwelling unit is going to go on which lot, we felt that needed a little bit more detail at the preliminary plat phase so that we would be comfortable that these lots are big enough to have required parking for each dwelling unit, required landscaping minimums, and all of the requirements that go into a lot. And that LUBA criteria basically says you have to have at least enough evidence in the record that you know that all that stuff can be met before you can divide the lots. Because what happens if you approve it preliminarily, they get into final platting and and then they can't make the numbers crunch. Then you have a problem with the applicant says, well, we've got the right to so many lots and you approved it that way. Then they may start pushing the city to, not make it fully comply with something. And you just don't want to be in that kind of situation, which is why LUBA adopts this rule that you've got to look at the conditions and make sure they can be met. And that particular site plan, it doesn't have a lot of details on it. Doesn't have a lot of areas and measurements. And so it's really hard for us to look at that and tell whether or not you could meet some of these standards. So that's basically what we were arguing there.
Okay. Page 63. 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph. When you cite section 10.10.040, that section requires sidewalks to serve off-site pedestrian circulation.
That's correct.
Specifically requires off-site improvements when necessary for safe and efficient pedestrian circulation. And then down below the last sentence, which is what I want to ask you about. It is unfair to shift the burden to existing residents when the need for sidewalks and other infrastructure is being driven primarily, there we go again, by the single high density development. My question is not the same as I asked Mr. Housley. My question is, who has said anything about shifting the burden to existing residents when the need for sidewalks and other infrastructure is being driven by a single high density development? I haven't seen anything in the record that would indicate that the city would ever consider this.
Well, I heard some testimony earlier today from city staff that one of the ways that they could do this would be an LID, which would shift the burden to all the people that lived up and down the road. And so I think that's what I'm talking about there. And I do agree that significantly or substantially is a much better word in that section than primarily.
Okay. Thank you. Page 64. Already been answered. I do have a question about HLA, and they're not here, correct?
That's correct.
Well, I'm going to ask the question, and if you can't answer it, maybe you could get back to us. Your big concern over the intersection at Route 97 Fremont and the negative impact that the proposed subdivision will have on it. What destination would people who live in the subdivision have in mind when they are using this intersection?
Pretty much any destination where they wanted to take Highway 84 to anywhere, or they were going to cross 197 to go anywhere in Washington. Because if you live here, it's a quick shot to get on the freeway going east. It's a long ways through a lot of small streets to go west to get to the freeway. When I drove to the subject site, that's how I went. I didn't even think about going any other way.
Right. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Marash? Okay, we're nearing 8:30, and during our break, the city council was talking among ourselves about the likelihood of finishing up tonight. We still have numerous comments from the public that we'd like to hear. And I would expect that this hearing is going to be going on for not an inconsiderable amount of time. So at this point, I would like to ask the city council if they like to continue, which I'm totally fine with, or they would like to postpone this hearing until a later date. And before we get to that, I'd like to ask our attorney, Mr. Crean, if you would please outline the options that we have should we choose to adjourn tonight.
So it's entirely up to the council, and in particular, the presiding officer, in this case, you, Mayor Mays, to continue the hearing to a later date. You just need to identify that date, the time on the record tonight, so that everybody following and participating knows when that is. I believe that we still have a couple of weeks left in the calendar before we run out of time under the what's called the 120-day rule. So I would encourage you to work with staff in the next few minutes to figure out what that date is, and then just announce that for the record and recess the hearing. You would be asked, or I would encourage all of the city councilors not to try to avoid any discussion or conversation about this during the interim, and we'll touch base on ex parte contacts when we get back in 2 weeks, if you decide to continue the hearing.
Thank you. What is the pleasure of the city council?
I don't think we're going to come close to finishing.
I'm very interested in hearing the comments of the public that's been involved, as we all are, and we're not going to reach anywhere near the end of that, judging by the list that we've seen tonight. So Izetta will have to give us some options, and if it's next Monday night, or whenever it might be, I think it's fairly as soon as possible. We don't want to drag this out too long.
Well, we might forget what we heard tonight.
I don't think so.
I like a continuation. I agree.
Councilor Long Curtis, Councilor Randall.
I would definitely like to continue it because I want to hear from the public.
Okay, it's the consensus of the city council that we postpone this hearing until a later date. Councilor Runyon has just suggested possibly Monday, which would be
31st.
August 31st. Does anybody have a conflict with August 31st? Or does the applicant or the appellant have a conflict? Mr., how about you guys?
I have no conflict that night. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just checking my calendar to see if I have another public hearing that night. And luckily I don't.
Councilor Randall?
I will be out of town, but I will participate remotely.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilor Randall, you're okay? Councilor Runyon, next Monday?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Sounds like we have unanimous consent to go with next Monday, August 31st at 5:30. So do I have to say anything special, Chris, other than this is now adjourned until that time, or?
Well, yeah, you're continuing, strictly speaking, under the jargon of the practice, you're continuing this hearing to next Monday at 5:30.
Okay, I'd like to apologize to all the citizens that have Zoomed in. Please recognize that we did get started a little late, but also recognize that the Plan Commission went through 4 different meetings on this, and I certainly didn't expect us to finish tonight, but it's a complicated issue and it's a very important issue, and I think we're certainly going to take the time that you all deserve to hear this issue. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and with that, I am now adjourning this public hearing until Monday, August 31st at 5:30. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.